Grok 4. This is the latest artificial intelligence system, and let me be very, very clear. This is a moment where promise and peril are going to collide.
For centuries, the Book of Enoch existed in a strange place between history, religion, and mystery. It was never completely forgotten, but it was never fully accepted either. A text surrounded by controversy, hidden traditions, and unanswered questions, it described journeys into the heavens, encounters with mysterious celestial beings, visions of cosmic judgment, and secrets about the origin of evil that were never included in the Bible most people know today. It was a book that seemed to stand just outside the official story of religious history, close enough to influence it, but distant enough to remain a mystery. But before we uncover the secrets hidden inside this ancient text, make sure to subscribe to the channel and help us reach our goal of 5,000 subscribers. Because the deeper we look into the Book of Enoch, the more we discover that this forgotten manuscript may hold connections to some of the biggest questions in human history: the origins of evil, the mystery of fallen angels, and the hidden traditions that shaped the world we know today. For centuries, the complete story of Enoch remained hidden from much of the Western world. Although ancient copies had survived in Ethiopia, where the Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved the text in the ancient Ge'ez language, most scholars in Europe had little access to the complete manuscript until the 18th century. In 1773, Scottish explorer James Bruce returned from Ethiopia with copies of the Book of Enoch, introducing the mysterious text to a wider Western audience and beginning a new era of academic investigation. But the biggest turning point came much later, in the 20th century, when the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls between 1947 and 1956 transformed our understanding of ancient Jewish writings. Among the thousands of fragments discovered in caves near Qumran, researchers found multiple Aramaic fragments of the Book of Enoch dating back to approximately the 3rd to 1st centuries BCE. These discoveries proved that Enoch was not a medieval invention or a forgotten legend, but a genuinely ancient text that was circulating among Jewish communities long before the rise of Christianity. Recently, researchers turned to a completely new tool to examine this ancient manuscript. They placed the Book of Enoch under the analysis of Grok, the artificial intelligence system created by Elon Musk's company, XAI, launched in 2023. The goal was not to prove or disprove the supernatural claims inside the text, but to allow a machine to study its structure, language, themes, and connections without being influenced by centuries of religious debates and interpretations. What emerged was not just a simple summary of an ancient book. Instead, Grok highlighted patterns, connections, and ideas that revealed just how complex and influential this forgotten manuscript really was. From the mysterious story of the fallen watchers and the Nephilim, to ancient astronomy, forgotten traditions, and the ideas that may have shaped some of the most important religious writings in history. For those unfamiliar with the Book of Enoch, also known as First Enoch, it is an ancient Jewish religious work traditionally attributed to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah. Scholars generally place its composition somewhere between 300 and 100 BCE, although many researchers believe that some sections may preserve much older traditions. The text follows Enoch as he experiences extraordinary heavenly journeys, encounters powerful angels, witnesses the structure of the universe, and receives visions about judgment, the future of humanity, and the final battle between good and evil. But despite its importance, the Book of Enoch disappeared from most biblical traditions. In Western Christianity, the book was eventually excluded from the official biblical canon, and for more than 1,000 years, the complete text was practically unknown in Europe. However, one major exception preserved it. the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. While many other communities lost access to the work, Ethiopia maintained the complete Book of Enoch in the ancient Ge'ez language as part of its religious tradition. Because of that preservation, the ancient text survived long enough to return to the attention of Western scholars. In 1773, Scottish explorer James Bruce brought copies of the Ethiopian manuscript back to Europe, opening the door for researchers to study a work that had been absent from Western knowledge for centuries. What makes the Book of Enoch even more fascinating is that it was not an isolated text with no influence. The New Testament book of Jude directly quotes from Enoch, and many scholars believe that its ideas influenced the worldview of early Jewish and Christian communities. Some researchers argue that Jesus and his followers would have been familiar with Enochic traditions because these ideas were circulating widely during that period. This raises one of the biggest questions surrounding the book. Why was something so influential eventually left outside most Bibles? Was it because its stories were too strange? Was its detailed description of angels and the spiritual world considered too controversial? Or did it contain ideas that religious authorities believed were better left outside the mainstream tradition? That mystery is exactly what made the idea of analyzing Enoch with artificial intelligence so interesting. Instead of approaching the book only through centuries of theological arguments, researchers could now examine it from a different perspective, looking for literary patterns, repeated themes, and connections hidden throughout the text. Grok, the AI system developed by XAI, was designed to analyze large amounts of information, identify relationships between ideas, and explain complicated subjects in a more accessible way. While artificial intelligence has already been used to study ancient writings, such as the Dead Sea Scrolls, biblical manuscripts, and other historical documents, the difference with a system like Grok is accessibility. For the first time, ordinary readers could ask complex questions about ancient religious texts without needing years of academic training or access to specialized research libraries. People could ask the AI to compare chapters, track recurring symbols, examine theological ideas, and connect Enoch with other ancient traditions. And what appeared from that analysis was not simply a shortened version of the book. Grok highlighted deeper structures within the text, revealing patterns that scholars had studied for decades, but that were often hidden inside academic discussions. One of the most significant areas Grok focused on was the story of the Watchers and the Nephilim. The opening section of Enoch, known as the Book of the Watchers, describes a group of heavenly beings called the Watchers. Their original purpose was to observe humanity, but according to the text, they abandoned their role and descended to earth. There, they took human wives and produced a mysterious hybrid race known as the Nephilim. This story forms the foundation of the entire beginning of Enoch. It expands dramatically on a brief and mysterious passage found in Genesis 6, where the sons of God are described as taking human wives and producing giants. While Genesis provides only a few lines about this event, Enoch transforms it into a detailed narrative filled with names, events, and consequences. The text identifies the leader of the Watchers as Samyaza and describes around 200 angels who descended to earth. It even names several of them and explains the forbidden knowledge they introduced to humanity. According to Enoch, these beings taught humans advanced skills such as metalworking, weapon creation, astrology, magic, and other forms of knowledge that the text presents as corrupting influences. Grok highlighted that this story shares striking similarities with much older Mesopotamian traditions, particularly stories about the Apkallu, semi-divine beings from Sumerian and Babylonian mythology who were believed to have descended from the heavens and taught humanity the foundations of civilization. The similarities between these traditions have fascinated researchers for decades. Some scholars believe these stories may preserve memories of shared ancient traditions that traveled across cultures through trade and communication. Others argue that different civilizations independently created similar stories to explain the same questions. Where did knowledge come from? Why does evil exist? And what happens when humans cross boundaries they were never meant to cross? The usefulness of AI analysis in this case was not that it discovered a completely unknown connection. Instead, it allowed readers to see multiple connections at the same time, combining ideas from mythology, archaeology, and religious studies into one understandable picture. The Nephilim, the mysterious offspring of the Watchers and human women, are another major part of Enoch's story. The text describes them as enormous beings who consumed everything humanity produced. Eventually, they became violent, turning against humans and even against each other. After their destruction, Enoch claims that their spirits remained on earth as evil forces, becoming the origin of demonic beings. This idea represents one of the most significant theological claims in the entire book. The Bible mentions the Nephilim, but never explains their ultimate fate or provides a detailed explanation for the origin of evil spirits. Enoch attempts to answer those unanswered questions. Grok also identified that the concept of powerful hybrid beings appearing as a source of corruption is not unique to Enoch. Similar themes appear throughout ancient mythology, including the Greek stories of the Titans, Sumerian divine beings, and certain figures from Egyptian traditions. Of course, these similarities do not prove that these beings existed or that every culture was describing the same event. What they reveal is something equally fascinating. Across different civilizations, humans repeatedly created stories about powerful beings who crossed forbidden boundaries, shared dangerous knowledge, and changed the course of humanity. When all these discoveries are viewed together, Grok's analysis suggested that the Book of Enoch was far more than a forgotten religious curiosity. It was a complete and carefully developed worldview, a detailed cosmology that explored the origins of evil, the structure of the spiritual realm, the role of supernatural beings, and the ultimate destiny of humanity in a way far more detailed than many texts that became part of the official biblical tradition. One of the most fascinating discoveries highlighted by Grok's analysis was that the Book of Enoch does not simply describe a vague story about fallen angels. It gives them identities, names, and specific responsibilities. Unlike many ancient texts that mention supernatural beings only in passing, Enoch presents an entire hierarchy of heavenly figures and explains exactly how their actions changed the course of human history. According to the text, the rebellion was led by Samyaza, but he was not alone. Enoch describes around 200 watchers who descended together upon Mount Hermon, each playing a different role in the corruption of humanity. Among them were figures such as Azil, Armaros, Barakal, Kokabel, Zachiel, and many others. These were not portrayed as random creatures of chaos. They were powerful beings who possessed knowledge far beyond what humans were believed to understand at the time. Among all of them, Azil receives some of the strongest attention. Enoch describes him as the one who introduced humanity to the art of making weapons, teaching humans how to create swords, shields, and armor. In other words, he is connected with the rise of organized warfare. But his influence did not stop there. The text also associates him with teaching humans the use of precious metals, jewelry, and physical adornment, which Enoch presents as another form of corruption because it shifted humanity toward pride, vanity, and moral decline. The punishment of Azil is one of the most dramatic moments in the text. Enoch describes him being bound, removed from the world, and placed into darkness while awaiting the final judgment. Interestingly, Grok highlighted a possible connection between this figure and the mysterious name Azazel mentioned in Leviticus 16, where one goat from the Day of Atonement ritual is sent into the wilderness. For many readers, the meaning behind this name remains unclear, but Enoch provides a much more detailed background for a figure associated with rebellion, corruption, and punishment. This is where AI-assisted analysis becomes especially interesting. Finding connections like this manually requires comparing different translations, studying ancient languages, and going through years of academic research. Grok did not create a new discovery, but it organized these complicated relationships in a way that allowed ordinary readers to see connections that were previously hidden behind specialized scholarship. But the Book of Enoch is not only about angels and judgment. One of the most surprising sections of the text is its detailed discussion of astronomy. Chapters 72 through 82, known as the Book of the Luminaries, represent one of the oldest surviving sections of Enoch, with fragments discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls dating back approximately 2,000 years. This part of the book focuses on the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. At first glance, it may seem like a simple ancient explanation of the heavens, but a closer look reveals a surprisingly organized attempt to describe the structure of time itself. Grok highlighted that Enoch presents a 364-day solar calendar divided into 4 seasons of 91 days each. This calendar system is different from the lunar calendar that became dominant in later Jewish tradition. However, what makes it especially interesting is that a similar calendar appears in other Dead Sea Scrolls documents, particularly texts connected by some scholars with the Essen community. Because of these similarities, some researchers have suggested that the group responsible for preserving the Dead Sea Scrolls may have been connected to the same religious tradition that produced or valued the Book of Enoch. The astronomy described in Enoch is not scientifically accurate by modern standards, but that does not make it insignificant. What stands out is the level of observation behind it. The text reflects a society that carefully watched the movements of celestial bodies and attempted to create a systematic explanation for how the universe operated. One example is the description of the sun moving through different gates in the eastern and western horizons throughout the year. While the imagery is symbolic, it reflects a real observation. The position where the sun rises and sets changes with the seasons. Ancient civilizations depended on tracking these changes to create calendars, determine agricultural cycles, and organize religious festivals. In that sense, this section of Enoch is not simply mythology. It represents an ancient attempt to understand the universe through observation, measurement, and careful study of the natural world. It reveals a society looking toward the sky and trying to uncover the hidden order behind creation. But the Book of Enoch does not stop with the origins of evil or the structure of the cosmos. It also looks forward, describing visions of humanity's future and the final transformation of the world. Chapters 83 through 90 contain what are known as the dream visions, where Enoch receives 2 major revelations. The first is a terrifying vision of a great flood that destroys the earth, an event that connects directly with the story of Noah. The second is a much larger symbolic vision known as the animal apocalypse, where the entire history of humanity is retold through the language of animals. In this vision, major biblical figures are transformed into symbolic creatures. Adam and Eve appear as white bulls. The people of Israel are represented as sheep. Their enemies appear as dangerous predators. The entire story of human history unfolds like a massive symbolic battlefield filled with horns, claws, and beasts. Grok's analysis connected this section with a concept historians call vaticinium ex eventu, meaning a prophecy written after the events it appears to predict. According to many scholars, parts of the animal apocalypse describe historical events with such specific detail that they seem to reflect knowledge of events that had already happened. This is not considered a fringe idea among historians. It is a common method used to date ancient writings and understand how different sections developed over time. Scholars generally connect the animal apocalypse with the Maccabean period of the 2nd century BCE because its symbolic imagery appears to closely reflect the Jewish struggle against Seleucid rule. However, Enoch's vision does not end with past events. It moves beyond history into the future, describing a final confrontation between good and evil, the destruction of wicked powers, and the creation of a renewed world filled with peace. Grok pointed out that this structure shares remarkable similarities with the Book of Revelation. Both texts follow a similar pattern: a period of suffering, divine judgment, the defeat of evil, and the restoration of creation. This raises one of the most debated questions in biblical scholarship. Did the author of Revelation directly draw from the Enochic tradition? The connection has been discussed for generations, and many scholars believe that the influence is undeniable. The similarities are not simply about general ideas of the end times. They include shared themes, imagery, and expectations about how history would reach its final conclusion. But perhaps the most attention-grabbing connection comes from chapters 46 through 48, where Enoch describes a mysterious heavenly figure known as the Son of Man. In Enoch, this figure is not an ordinary human. He exists before creation, stands beside God, possesses divine authority, judges the wicked, and brings justice to the righteous at the end of days. That title carries enormous importance because Son of Man is the phrase Jesus uses for himself more than any other title throughout the Gospels. Across Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus repeatedly refers to himself using this expression. Especially in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus uses the title in contexts involving future judgment, heavenly authority, and the coming kingdom, ideas that closely resemble the description found in Enoch. Grok's comparison highlighted that the characteristics assigned to Enoch's Son of Man figure, including his existence before creation, his role as a judge, his connection with divine authority, and his association with light and wisdom, strongly overlap with descriptions later applied to Jesus. This has led to decades of debate among scholars. Some argue that Jesus intentionally used an existing Enochic concept to communicate the kind of figure he claimed to be. Others believe the similarities reflect a broader religious environment where these ideas were already circulating among Jewish communities. Either way, this is not a new theory created by artificial intelligence. The discussion has existed in academic theology since the 19th century. The difference is that most people never encounter this connection because the Book of Enoch was not included in the Bible traditions they grew up with. Once this connection becomes visible, it becomes difficult to ignore. However, there is an important detail that prevents the story from becoming too simple. When Grok was asked how strong this connection really was, it highlighted a major scholarly issue. The section containing the Son of Man material, known as the Book of Parables, is surprisingly absent from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Almost every other major section of Enoch has been found among the Qumran discoveries, but the parables are missing. Scholars take this seriously because it raises questions about whether this section was written later or developed within a different religious community. This absence does not erase the possible connection between Enoch and early Christianity. The Book of Parables was clearly circulating before or around the 1st century, even if it was not preserved among the Qumran manuscripts. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes ancient texts like Enoch so fascinating. The most interesting discoveries are often not simple answers, but the complicated questions that remain after the evidence is examined carefully. But perhaps the biggest mystery surrounding the Book of Enoch is not what it contains. It is why a text with such influence, such ancient roots, and such a powerful impact on early religious thought eventually disappeared from most Bibles. So, why was the Book of Enoch left out? The answer, according to Grok's analysis, is far more complicated than a simple story of a book being removed. The reality is that the Book of Enoch was never part of one single universally accepted Bible tradition from the beginning. Different religious communities made different decisions at different points in history, and those decisions were shaped by theology, politics, and the needs of each community. When Jewish scholars finalized the Hebrew Scriptures during the late 1st and early 2nd centuries CE, Enoch was not included. Some researchers believe one possible reason was the book's unusual focus on angels, fallen heavenly beings, and detailed descriptions of the spiritual world. The story of the Watchers descending to Earth, interacting with humans, and introducing forbidden knowledge may have seemed too controversial or too difficult to fit within the developing boundaries of Jewish religious identity, especially after the destruction of the Second Temple, a period when Jewish communities were redefining themselves. The Christian story followed a different path. As early churches began establishing which writings would become part of the biblical canon, many texts were debated and evaluated. Councils such as Nicaea in 325 CE and Carthage in 397 CE played important roles in shaping later Christian traditions, although the process was gradual and complex. By this time, the Book of Enoch had already existed for centuries. Early Christians were familiar with its ideas, and its influence could be seen in discussions about angels, judgment, the end times, and the coming kingdom of God.